Okay, so let's talk. Well, I know there's a lot of politically charged topics we could talk about, but we'll start off with the one that usually gets people going. Mac versus PC. Oh no. All right. So, I've had several of my friends over the last couple of years who had been Mac users forever make the switch to PC. And this had been something that I had really not seriously considered until actually a few weeks ago. So there are a few things that have changed in recent history that had me rethinking my decision of platform. That's obviously maybe one of the biggest and most major changes that you can make in your tool set. First, software. Well, if you're using Adobe stuff, in fact, if you're using most applications, they have both Mac and Windows versions. In fact, a lot of the applications that I use even have Linux versions available. So the operating system to me, on one level, was absolutely irrelevant. It really kind of came down to stability, how well do I know it, and what works for me, what is going to give me the least amount of downtime or aggravation, and maybe even more on a subjective level, do I like the way it looks or how the windows open, or some of those smaller subjective things. Some of those matter, some of them don't. Depends on you. Okay. So stepping past the operating system thing, the hardware. Macs have really been frustrating with hardware. Apple will tend to really sit on doing updates for a while, and then all of a sudden they'll come out with new machines that are pretty current, often at times that are pretty competitive to PCs of similar specs. The problem is, for example, the trash can Macs haven't been updated in 3 years. We're all sitting here waiting for them to show up. Meanwhile, what I've gone and done is I went out and bought a used last generation tower, the 5.1 hardware. So when I switched from my old tower to my new tower, all my drives and PCI cards and stuff went into that machine, and it works great. It's a 1224 core machine. It's plenty fast enough so far. However, it's not the latest greatest machine out there. So now that Apple has announced the specs for 10.12, something very subtle was in there that not everyone necessarily picked up on, and that is that they are cutting support for a bunch of older machines. Now, the machines that could only run 32-bit operating system, those of course are pretty much long gone, or people are still nursing them on 10.6.8 or something. But the going forward part is a little more interesting. The 2008 machines are not going to be supported on 10.12. Now, for a little while, there's going to be a gap here. It's not going to be a big deal. Let's also consider that you're talking about a machine that's 8 years old. I can kind of see on one level Apple wanting to cut those machines off. It's probably at the point of where reliability is going to get questionable, but I used one for quite a while. So folks who are still using those machines who aren't ready to give them up are going to have to make a decision. Are they going to use them into sort of second tier purposes like a server box or a capture box or whatever, or are they going to sell them, or what are they going to do with them? But they're not going to run the newest operating system. And looking forward just slightly, that means that at some point the applications like your editor and your compositing software aren't going to run either, because they're going to require a fairly new operating system that your tower will no longer operate. So probably if we wanted to extrapolate that fairly, we'd be talking about 2 years out to really see these machines get locked into a position of you can't run the latest software that you'd like. So let's talk where I'm at with my machine. I'm actually putting a Titan X GPU into this machine as the biggest, baddest, fastest, most amount of RAM graphics card that you can get, because I need that for running Resolve for doing 4K work, and this machine does great with 4K. It has no problem doing 2 or 3 streams of it. It's 1224 core. And the difficult reality right now is that the machine that I have, which is technically about 5 years old, will actually now kick butt on the current trash can machines, which cost several times more. You can get up into $7,000-8,000, and the machine that I bought here used for $2,000, and I've got a bunch of updates into, will just plain mostly blow them out of the water. Now, of course, yes, the new machines have faster RAM and Thunderbolt and yada yada. Great. But you can't stick 4 drives into drive bays on them. You can't change the GPUs, or at least you can't as far as putting something new or modern in. You're pretty much stuck with a choice of a repair part to upgrade, say, a 300 to a 500 to a 700. So that's an incredibly huge limitation. It's not like I can put a new AMD or NVIDIA GPU into those machines and keep them running. So one thing with these towers is there's a whole little cottage industry on upgrading them, and one of those upgrades is actually upgrading the CPUs. For example, you can put dual 3.5 gigahertz Xenons into the machine for about $600, and that includes the processors, an Allen key, instructions on how to take the thing apart, heatsink paste. It's 4 bolts on each heatsink, pop them off, change the processors out, put them back together. Carefully. So there are some options right now to keep these towers alive with relatively modern processors that, if you had the choice between $600 for a pair of new processors versus $6,000 for a trash can Mac Pro, I think I know what most of us would do in that case. So taking a look at the last generation of Mac towers should be a hardware option that you should take a look at if you wish to continue on the Mac platform, and an iMac is just not enough horsepower to get the job done for you. Now, if I wanted to build a top-end PC, I know that I could get into some serious upper 4 figures as far as budget on a machine like that. But even still, if I wanted to build a PC for $2,000 to $3,000, I could probably build a pretty crazy fast machine. iMac 5Ks are gorgeous, but let's face it, a 4-core processor right now looks kind of lame. And I'm sorry to say that, but realistically, Apple needs to desperately stick 6, if not 8-core processors into an iMac to make it a pretty good mid-level machine capable of chewing through 4K with reasonable fluency and fluidity. If they built like a 8-core i7 mini tower with 2 16x graphic slots, I could be real happy using Thunderbolt and USB 3. And on my laptop, I have a lot of Thunderbolt stuff. I've got a Thunderbolt drive, I've got Thunderbolt array, I've got various Thunderbolt eSATA adapters and whatever, and they work fine, they're fast, they're reliable, I don't have any problems with them. Well, except for the USB to Ethernet adapters. Those things have been a pain. Apple's been killing off the drivers for some hardware, which has been really, really frustrating because, for example, the adapter that I had worked up until 10.11.4, and then it quit working in 10.11.5. So that's sort of my stream of consciousness for now. I balanced all the trade-offs, the give and takes of the two platforms, the OSs, whatever. And for right now, I can live on the Mac hardware because I know I've got at least another couple years to go with it. I don't need the absolute fastest, craziest, most insane machine made out there. I don't, for example, do huge ray trace 3D renders in 4K. My need for having an extreme machine is a lot lower. What I do need is 1, if not 2, great GPUs, lots of video RAM, lots of regular RAM to handle the typical editing and grading and compositing things that I'm doing. Most of them are not super render intense, especially on the hardware that we have now, which is really fast. If Apple doesn't deliver hardware that makes sense to me, well, then a year or a year and a half from now, I can be one of those switchers too, who may wind up moving all their production work over to a PC, but I'll probably keep all my personal stuff, my regular computing, on a Mac. Alright, so that's enough of my rambling for today on platform. I'm going to stay put on the Mac platform for now. Going to keep my eyes open, keep my options open. You never know, 2-3 years down the road, I could be doing what a lot of my friends are doing or have done. So next up, in the next video, what nonlinear editor should I use? I've been messing with Final Cut X. This is going to get interesting.